We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break the bonds of our affection. The mystic cords of memory, stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone, all over this broad land, will yet swell the chorus of the Union, when again touched, as surely they will be, by the better angels of our nature.
It's 1860, and Abraham Lincoln has now been elected as the 16th President of the United States of America. In the future, he will be known as one of the greatest presidents the country has ever seen, although, at the time, not everyone thought so, specifically most Southerners. Soon, after Abraham Lincoln's election, South Carolina becomes the first state to secede from the Union, and many others go along as well. These states are concerned that the new president will outlaw slavery, the only thing keeping their economy afloat. By February 4th, 1861, 7 southern states have formed a separate government, the Confederate States of America, with Jefferson Davis as their president. Jefferson Davis has been unanimously chosen to lead this new nation as the first and only president of the Confederate nation. He will loyally lead the Confederation from 1861 to 1865. On April 12, 1861, Confederate forces attack a Union fort known as Fort Sumter in Charleston, marking the official start of the war. There are no casualties in this battle, which is why many people consider Bull Run, known to the South as Manassas, to be the first battle of the war. It's July 21st, 1861, and Union forces are attempting an advance towards the Confederate capital in a battle that will be known as Bull Run or Manassas. However, their attempt won't go very well because the Union is later blocked at Bull Run Creek by the Confederate Army. Despite this, the Union did manage to maintain control over the battle in early hours, eventually being driven back to Washington, D.C. for a Confederate win. During this battle, Thomas Stonewall Jackson, the lieutenant general, gains his nickname for standing like a stone wall in battle and holding strong. In addition to being the first real battle of the war, the Confederacy's unlikely victory at Bull Run also marks the start of people realizing that the war would not be won easily. The next major battle of the war is the Battle of Shiloh in Hardin County, which happens on April 6th and 7th of 1862. General Ulysses Grant manages to lead the Union to a bloody victory, but both sides suffer heavy losses. The battle starts when Confederates storm a Union camp. Despite their unpreparedness, the Union Army still manages to counterattack, and by the second day, Confederate forces have already lost their chances of winning. This is due to the death of their commander, General Albert Sidney Johnston, who takes a bullet to the knee and bleeds to death. Later on, when the war had ended, Jefferson Davis would write regarding Shiloh, "When Sidney Johnston fell, it was the turning point of our fate, for we had no other hand to take up his work in the West." On September 17, 1862, in Washington County, the Battle of Sharpsburg/Antietam, also known as the bloodiest single-day battle in American history, took place when Robert E. Lee, the general of the Confederate Army, who is admired for many for his military strategy and leadership, invades Maryland. Antietam marks the first Confederate invasion of Union territory, and as the Confederates advance northward, the capture of Washington, D.C. becomes increasingly likely. The Confederates hope to shift the setting for battles mostly taking place in Confederate territory to more fighting in the Union territory with Confederates on the offensive. Clara Barton, a nurse and humanitarian who later founded the American Red Cross and was one of the first women to work for the federal government, had an important role in this battle, providing aid to soldiers on the front lines. The battle ends up inconclusive, however, it is considered a strategic win for the Union because it gives Lincoln an opportunity to issue the Emancipation Proclamation. So a few days later, on September 22nd, the proclamation states that as of January 1863, all persons held of slaves are and henceforward shall be free. It is around this point that the focus of the war shifts shifts from keeping the Union together to instead squashing slavery and granting freedom to all Americans. In 1863, the Union decides that they need to make a real effort to stop the Confederate troops from advancing further north. So, on July 1st, Union forces halt the Confederate troops in an unplanned confrontation. By the time both sides have called reinforcements, it has become a real battle. Soon, Confederates outnumber Union forces, and they fall back, but later the Union comes back to win. Now known as the Battle of Gettysburg, it was a major turning point in the war. During the battle, Union forces defeated Robert E. Lee. The Battle of Gettysburg ends with 51,112 casualties, making it the bloodiest battle of the Civil War.
Sir, we have arrived at the Mississippi River.
Yes, we have.
On May 18, 1863, the siege of Vicksburg begins. The goal is for the Union to gain possession of the highly valuable Mississippi River, which is an important route for goods going north, as well as being the connector for the halves of the South. The presidents on either side have differing ideas for what Vicksburg, conveniently situated on the Mississippi River, means for them. While Jefferson Davis calls it
nailhead that holds the South's two halves together.
Lincoln states,
Vicksburg is the key. The war can never be brought to a close until that key is in our pocket.
Tirelessly, knowing that the Mississippi is an important part of winning the war. And after 47 long days of bloodshed, the Union has emerged victorious, holding that key and standing atop a geographically divided Confederacy. The Battle of Wilderness started in 1864 as the first stage of Grant's overland campaign. Out of the 163,000 people serving there were 150,000 deaths for both North and the South. Grant's overland campaign was a relentless series of battles by Ulysses S. Grant aimed at wearing down the Confederate Army. This was Lincoln's decision because after nearly 4 years of the Civil War, the Union needed to make real progress and trusted Grant to get it done. Many of these battles had a high human toll until the campaign ended at Cold Harbor, which was no less violent than the rest of the campaign. The fall of Richmond in April 1865 signaled the collapse of the Confederacy. Richmond was burned by the Confederate soldiers who set fire to a tobacco warehouse. The surrender at Appomattox Courthouse then followed, where Robert E. Lee surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant, effectively ending the war. Not only the battles and fighting won the war, but many smaller actions by normal people helped the Union in its fight for freedom. The Underground Railroad played a major part in the Civil War. It helped escaped slaves find their way to freedom, which was one of the main causes for the war. Many of the escaped slaves joined the Union Army, which contributed to the victory of the North. People who helped slaves through the Underground Railroad were called conductors. The two most well-known conductors were Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass, both escaped slaves who would do anything in their power to fight for freedom. People today look at these advocates for human rights as role models that help them to find courage to fight for their own rights. The Civil War may be over and slavery may be abolished, but there is still discrimination in the United States. The Civil War was a very important event in American history that has helped to shape economic independence and the society of the United States. It was not too long after the official end of the war when President Abraham Lincoln was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth while seeking to play Our American Cousin at Ford's Theater. This created uncertainty and tension in the young nation that was still recovering from the recent war, and it even led many Southern sympathizers to believe that the Confederacy could be restored. After shooting Lincoln, Booth was on the run for 12 more days before he was caught and killed. And the rest is history.